Well, we are rounding out our network infrastructure components, the last being firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. There is a lot of confusion, and rightly so, between the functions of a firewall and a router. If you see my first bullet here, I say a firewall blocks or allows traffic from moving between networks. And if you think back to my slide when I was talking about switching and routing, I said routers divide networks and move traffic between networks. And so people would look and say, well, isn't this kind of the same thing? Can a firewall do routing? And I would say, yes, it can. Can a router do basic firewall functions? And I would say, yes, it can. But when you talk to a network purist like myself, the advice you'll get is to let the firewall be a firewall and let the router be a router. They have specialized functions. I can change the fan belt in my car as well as I can change the oil, but I can't do it anywhere near as good or as fast as an auto mechanic can. So let's let the auto mechanic be the auto mechanic. He should be the one that fixes my car because he's going to do it right and he's going to be a lot more efficient at it. That's the premise of the firewall. The firewall is geared for security. First thing that you notice if you look at this box, which is, by the way, a Cisco ASA firewall, is that you don't see any serial ports. Remember that when we were talking about routing functionality, another nugget, right? There was serial ports sitting on there that allowed it to interface with frame relay and ATM and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's because usually you'll have that router sitting outside connecting directly to the network. And it's allowing most things through, if not everything, right? Because it's the router. The router by default allows everything and denies by exception. Whereas a firewall denies everything and allows by exception. At least that's its default state when you pull it out of the box. So you have the router doing what a router does, connecting to just say a serial network and bringing that connection in, and then you'll put a firewall behind it, right? And that's doing all of the filtering of the network. And then that connects to the internal switch inside of your network and all of the inside devices and all that kind of stuff. That's a typical network design. The router's doing the routing, the firewall's doing the security, and the switches is connecting all the devices together. Now, these firewalls can run in transparent or routed mode. Transparent mode being you don't see them, as in you could actually put a firewall in between two switches in your network and not break up the networks. That's definitely not something that a router would do, right? This is known as transparent mode because sometimes you may want to inspect traffic even inside of your organization, and you don't want people to be able to tell that you actually have a firewall there. So you can have one network, and when I say that, we're going to get into TCP/IP and subnetting and IP network design. But IP-wise, you have one TCP/IP network, but there's actually a firewall sitting in the middle inspecting all the traffic. That's transparent mode. The far more common mode is actually routed mode, where it divides up the network. One network is up here, one network is down here, and that's all there is to it. The big difference between the firewall and the router, besides the fact that the firewall is tuned to do security functions, so it does it much faster and more efficient than a router can, right, is that it changes the allow-deny paradigm. A router, as I mentioned, allows everything by default and denies by exception, whereas a firewall denies everything, and I'm put a little asterisk next to the everything, denies everything, note, by default, and allows by exception, and that's where this keyword stateful comes in. See, firewalls do stateful filtering, and what that means is, let's just say we've got this firewall connected to a switch. When you set up the firewall, you set up your security zones, and one of the things that you'll do is you'll say, well, this has the security level of, let's just say 100. It's just a number. I just made it up. But the key of the number is that the higher numbers are considered the more secure zone. The lower numbers are the less secure zone. So let's say this firewall connects to the internet on its other interface, and we label that security zone as a 0, right? Stateful filtering means that by default, the firewall allows traffic to move from a higher security zone to a lower security zone. But it does not allow the opposite. The internet cannot speak to your inside network without being invited. What does that mean? Well, that's where this stateful idea comes in, is the firewall will watch the request. So I've got this guy going out to YouTube to watch a video, right? Goes through the firewall, and the firewall's like, okay, looks like Bob is going out to YouTube, and so I'm going to allow YouTube to come back in and talk to Bob, and to Bob only. And as soon as Bob's done with that session, I'm going to cut it off. So it does actually allow the internet to get in, but it's only by request and only for the time that that request lasts. We can dive deeper into that as we get more into firewalls. Many firewalls will also be equipped with an IPS module. Now, back in the day, and actually they still have them, Cisco would manufacture separate IPS units. Like you would buy a box that looked like this that would just be an intrusion prevention system inside of your network. But a lot of times, people now buy these as small modules that actually go inside of their firewall. What it does is watch for many different things going through that is unusual. Right? It is unusual for a computer to suddenly send a massive flurry of traffic that saturates all of the network connections. Now, a normal firewall rule would say, well, that computer's a trusted device, so let's just allow it through. But an IPS is like, whoa, that's weird. Bob doesn't usually saturate all of the network connections. Let's block that traffic because it's anomaly. Right? So it's looking for unusual network behavior. So it kind of learns the normal behaviors of your network and then blocks or at least sends you a warning. And you can configure all of that when something out of the normal happens, an unusual traffic pattern, an unusual method of access coming in to try and hit a server, or there's a lot of signatures in there. For example, when a new SQL Server virus or worm comes out and it starts going through, you can actually equip your IPS to dynamically update. It's kind of like inline virus protection, right? To watch the packets for the signature of a SQL Server virus, right? And it can actually block those based on that signature. It's kind of like virus protection. It used to be that you would only see IPS units in those high security organizations or with really paranoid people. But because of the weird and wacky world that we live in these days and the crazy security stuff that's going on, it's more common to see IPS units integrated with firewalls that you buy and you just activate with them with a license or something like that. Well, between this nugget and a couple previous nuggets, you have now seen all of the core network infrastructure components that exist in the world today. Now, I'm saying core network infrastructure components because there are others that you can add to it, but this is at the heart of just about every network system. And I love CCNA because it gives you an overview of just about everything, but keep in mind, these are career paths. There are people that do nothing but wireless access points, installation, management, tuning. There are people that do nothing but firewalls and IPS. I mean, that's why they have CCNA security, CCNP security, CCNA wireless, and down and it goes. Usually, these two go together, which is why we have CCNA routing and switching. But I've also met many people, usually those first getting into it, that do nothing but switches because there's a lot of day-to-day upkeep and changing VLANs and all of the typical configuration that goes into a switch environment. For a larger organization, they can afford to have individuals that do nothing but switches. So while this has been an overview, know that you can go deep into every single one of these areas. And we're going to spend the rest of the series unpacking both of these. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.